We learned about the market, where buyers and sellers trade for goods. We also learned about a supply and demand graphical model that we used to analyze that market. In that model, the buyer's behavior is depicted by the demand curve, and the seller's behavior is depicted by the supply curve. The first law, the law of demand, states that when the price of a good increases, buyers will want to buy less of that good. And when the price of a good decreases, then the buyers will want to buy more of that good. We use that law of demand to plot different points on the graph that will associate a particular quantity that the consumers want to buy of the good with the price at that quantity of the good. And so, if prices change, then we simply move along the curve and read the different points on the curve. But there are other factors that also affect the demand. These are called non-price determinants of demand. There are a few of them. The first one is the income. A consumer that will earn a higher wage will purchase more of a normal good. But as far as inferior goods are concerned, such as Walmart clothing, used cars, if a consumer makes more money, then that consumer will actually buy less of that good. Also, population size is a non-price determinant of demand. The larger the population, the greater the demand will be. A third non-price determinant of demand is the price of the related good. That good can be a substitute, or that good can be a complement. Let's take the market for Coca-Cola and Pepsi to illustrate substitutes. If the price of Pepsi goes up because people will want to buy less Pepsi, they will then buy more Coca-Cola. The reverse is also true. To illustrate the market for complements, let's take hot dog and hot dog buns. If the price of hot dogs goes up, then the consumer will want to purchase less hot dogs. And so they will purchase less hot dog buns. Again, the converse is also true. And finally, the last non-price determinant of demand will be taste. Really, everything else falls into that category. You might like a good because you just simply like the color, taste, the size of that good. Maybe it's as a result of a successful marketing campaign. Or simply your friend have that good and you also want to have it. When any of these non-price determinants of demand affect the market, we will not move along the curve. We will shift the demand curve. A shift of the demand curve to the right is an increase in the demand. And a shift of the demand curve to the left is a decrease in the demand. And this summarizes everything that there is to know about the demand. The second law, the law of supply, is based on the cost of production of goods. Companies will want to earn the maximum profit. Hence, that law The law of supply is the opposite of the law of demand. It states that if the price of a good increases, everything else being equal, companies will see that they can increase their profits and they will want to supply more of that good. But if the price of a good decreases, then companies will realize that they will make less money, their revenue will fall, they will not be interested in selling as much of that good, and they will decrease their supply. Just as we did with the law of demand, we use the law of supply to plot points on the graph that will associate different quantities that companies will want to produce to different prices at which they will accept to produce these goods. And again, there are non-price determinants of supply that can affect the supply curve. These are the cost of an input and technology. If an input that is used in the production of a good increases in price, then the company will see their profit margin decrease, and so they will want to produce less of the good. They will decrease their supply. But if the price of an input decreases, then the company will see that they can make more profits since their cost of production will decrease, and they will want to increase their supply of that good. As for technology, we will assume that any technology that is being used by a company will only help it to increase its profit margin. Hence, the company will want to increase its supply if any new technology is introduced. Again, if any of these non-price determinants of supply affects the market, we will shift the supply curve. And as was the case with the demand, a shift to the right will represent an increase, and a shift to the left, a decrease. And this is all that we needed to know about the supply. We will now put the demand and the supply on the same graph and practice some exercises. So let's go to the board. And now that we have a board behind us, let's use it to draw a demand and a supply together on a graph. That'll enable us to accurately depict the market and to also simulate what would happen if there was a natural disaster, to simulate the effect of a government monetary or fiscal policy, or even the introduction of a new iPhone. The first thing we want to do is to draw a generic graph with a supply and a demand. We have a vertical and a horizontal axis. We have price always on the vertical axis and quantity on the horizontal axis. We then draw a generic supply and a generic demand. It won't really matter how they're drawn. And just to make things simpler, we have a price, an equilibrium price. We have a quantity and equilibrium quantity, which are very easy to determine as they both depart from the only point possible where the supply and the demand will intersect. And now, let's try to do an exercise. Let's try to draw on the graph what would happen to the market for hybrid cars if the price went up to $6. And so let's assume that the price of gas is now $6. And so, the first question that we want to ask ourselves is, who will be impacted by this? Will the supply be impacted, or will the demand be impacted? We're going to have a simple rule where if one event occurs, it either impacts the demand or it impacts the supply. In this case, because the price of gas goes up, in the long term, customers of cars determine that it would be better for them to move to hybrid cars or to electric cars. Hence, they increase their demand for such cars. Now, I never said that the price of the hybrid cars increased or decreased. That might very well happen as a result of all of this. But for now, all we know is that the price of gas increased, and this causes people to want to buy hybrid cars because the price of the hybrid cars themselves hasn't changed yet. Then we do not have a movement along the curve, we have a shift. It's an increase in the demand for hybrid car, hence it's going to be a shift to the right. We now reach this new equilibrium point, let's call it B. And of course we had A before. We read this new equilibrium point. And we now understand that as a result of the increase in the price of gas, which affected the hybrid car market, the price of hybrid cars will go up from $20,000 to $23,000, and the quantity of hybrid cars that people are going to want to purchase will also increase. And these are the two results that we get. Let's do a more challenging exercise. Let's do an exercise where two events will occur simultaneously. I will erase this graph and I will draw a new graph. Let's now imagine that the question asks us to determine what would happen in the market for Samsung phones. And in this case, there's news that batteries in the Samsung phone catch fire but also there is a new technology that enables the producers of the Samsung phone to produce the phone differently. We always assume that a new technology can only decrease the cost of production. And so we can infer how that technology is going to affect this market. Also, because the Samsung phone catches fire, we can anticipate that potential buyers of that phone will be maybe scared away. Now, what's important here is that when two events occur, we necessarily draw them on two separate graphs. If we don't, the result will be very confusing and indeterminate. But if we are able to draw two events on two separate graphs and then consolidate the results of these two events through a table, then we'll be able to solve the problem on every occasion without ever making a mistake. So I will draw two graphs. I will always try to draw graphs that are similar so that any differences that we might notice in the market is not due to how the graphs were drawn. We always try to identify the equilibrium price. And now we draw each of the events on their own graph. It really doesn't matter the order in which we draw the events, the result will be the same. And so let's try this. Now, the fact that the phone catches fire means that people are afraid to buy the Samsung phone, and so we anticipate a decrease in the demand of the phone because, again, I didn't say that the price of the phone itself changed. I simply said that an event occurs that affects people demand, hence it's a non-price determinant. We now have a new equilibrium price. And what we notice is that the pressure on the price of the phone is at a decrease. And that the pressure on the phone as far as the quantities are concerned also tends to cause a decrease. And so we report this on a table. What we have here is that the price went down and that the quantity went down. And we now move to the second event, which is that because of that new technology, it is now cheaper for the producers of the Samsung phone, which are obviously elated by this news. They want to increase their supply of Samsung phones. Again, we identified the new equilibrium price. Again, we see that the pressure here is on the price going down, but the pressure on the quantity of the Samsung phone on the market is actually trying to increase the number of Samsungs on the market. This makes perfect sense, since the technology makes it cheaper for the producers to produce this good. They will tend to want to increase production. And because the technology lowers the cost, they might be able to pass on some of that to the customer. What we had here also made perfect sense. What we had was that because the Samsung caught fire and people were afraid to own one, they didn't want to buy as many phones, which obviously would have caused the prices to decrease. And so we now take event 2, we report it on the table. Again, we have that the price goes down. But here, as we mentioned, the pressure is on the quantity of the Samsung phones on the market to increase. To make the sum of all these forces acting on the market we simply look at the direction of the arrows, and here we encounter a problem. We do not know what the result will be. We say that the result as far as the quantity of Samsung phone that will be sold is ambiguous, but that surely the price of the Samsung phones will go down as a result of both of these events. And this is how we always draw two events occurring. We always want to draw them on two separate graphs. We always want to have a table in which we will report the effects of each of the events and then assess the cumulative effect of both of these events. If you follow these steps, you should have no problem solving any questions, any problems that has to do with the supply of the demand. When an event occurs, step one, does it affect the buyer, hence the demand, or does it affect the seller, hence the supply? Second, did the price of the good itself change? If it did, then it would be a movement along the curve. If any of the other non-price determinants are involved, then it would be a shift. We know that a shift to the right is an increase, and a shift to the left is a decrease. Third, we read the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. We compare that new equilibrium to the old equilibrium to determine what happened to the price and what happened to the quantities. Again, if two events occurred, we drew them on two separate graphs. We simply add the effect of each of the event and determine how the market is going to fare in the end. Remember, if two events occur, you will always have that either the price or the quantity will be indeterminate or ambiguous, but you will never know which one of the two will be indeterminate or ambiguous. Hence, you follow the steps, you will always get the result, and we have completed our lecture on the demand and the supply. Goodbye.